This is Gemara and Sukkah Daf Zayin. All the learning for this month, the month of Av, has been generously sponsored. Zecher Nishma Zechasel Shagav and Avram Yehuda, as well Rachel Bas Shamshin Aaron Tzvi. The learning of the entire Chabura. She have been tremendous chosi l'nishmasam. Of course, we cannot forget our Choli Man Vavei Chaim Misal Shalom Simon Reiziz Zar Bas Gnandol Ita Basim As Chayisai Yisol Meminta Lev Zbin Shalei Shema Zami Shavigo Shirchan Shbo Ventil Dinum Chan Rizim Chaim Mesmina Liv Rachav Atzav Musa Din Edom Hashem Minda Svim Vei Gerard and Vechel Zyon Azil Lahuva Rivka Bas Bashav and Atal Sim Vechlester Besar Shachali Yisrael, as well as Choshelech Rizal Chaim and Devayer and Shir Miriam Bas Rivka Gitol and Baruch Hashem to share good news that one of the other people we've been davening and learning the Schos HaShidduch Ataleya Bas Ita Baruch Hashem became a Kala last week. We pick it up, we're on the top of Tezayin Amid Aleph. Excuse me, we're about 6 lines down. Kufa says the Gemara, going back into a discussion that we opened up yesterday. Kufa says the Gemara, Amr Rav Ami, excuse me, the highlighting is not acting correctly. There we go. Kufa says the Gemara, Amr Rav Ami Bar Tav Yomi, says Rav Ami in the name of Bar Tav Yomi, Rav Ami Bar Tav Yomi, excuse me, the son of Tav Yomi. Succah b'bloi kelim sula. We said yesterday, if you use bloi kelim, worn out utensils, it is possible. Just like a utensil is mekabel tama, and you can't use that. The bloi kelim, the worn out utensils, you cannot use as well. Says the Gemara, my bloi kelim. What is the example of bloi kelim? What's the case? What are these worn out utensils that you're using as your schach? Amar Abaye says Abaye matzlani yashin bahem. Gimel al Gimel. We're discussing matzlanius. We're discussing worn out pieces of material, little scraps. They're not even Gimel al Gimel 3 by 3, and therefore what says Abaye? They're neither fit nor for poor people nor for wealthy people, and yet the halacha is, even though it's not fit for everyone, so you would think it doesn't have a din of a keli, that's the chiddush. It's a bloi kelim, it's a worn out, it's a part of a larger keli, and therefore it's going to be possible to use as schach. Tani kavasi the Ravami Bar Tav Yomi arayo machatzel shel shiva v'shel gemi shireo afal pi sheniftacha michshiyoreha ein misachin baher. If we have a mat of reed and Gemi, the remnants of it, even though it is less than the shear, you're not allowed to use as schach. Whereas machasel zakinim, if it's reeds, gedoyla, it's a large mat, misachim ba, you're allowed to use as schach. Kitana, small one, ein misachim ba. Rav Eliezer oimer, afi mekabel as toma, vein misachim ba. Even this last case is makabel tama a machsel zakinim, and therefore you're not going to be able to use it as schach. So the Gemara is explaining that the case of the worn out kelim is really indeed discussing a mat of reed of seksha, which is not gimel al gimel, and therefore you would think it doesn't have the din of a kli, even though in a similar case you brought from a brisa or raya, even though it's smaller than the normal size, it still has the din of a blai kelim. It's at some level a worn out or a piece of a keli, and therefore you cannot use it as schach. We continue. We spoke about if you chisel out that haystack, we said it's not a good sukkah. One of 2 reasons we discussed, either because gezerah, that you're going to come to sit in your house, or the other reason was ta'aseh v'lo yimna asui. You have to create a sukkah. It can't be something that was created on its own, and a gadish, a haystack, has the roof the whole time, and you're just taking out the inside cavity. Said the Mishnah, that is no good. Amar Ravuna comes along to qualify this statement. Loishanu el she'in sham chalal tefach b'meshech shiva. The case where the haystack is not kosher, is not kosher, is only when you do not have a 1 by 7, a airspace in the middle of the haystack to start of 1 tefach. If you had this airspace, if you had a crack in it, a 1 tefach tall by 7 tefachim wide within the airspace, then it, yes, has a din of a sukkah. Tananami hachi, we're bringing a raya to this point, that any time the haystack would have a 1 by 7 airspace to begin, it would, yes, have a din of a sukkah. What's the raya? Choytit begadish lasli sukkah. It says in a brisa that you chisel out the haystack to make for it a sukkah. Sukkah. It's a good sukkah. What do you mean it's a good sukkah? Sukkah. Our Mishnah said that the haystack is not a good sukkah. Elalav shmamina, says the Gemara. What's to teach us? Ravuna shmamina. It's a raya to Ravuna. One Mishnah says it's not a good haystack is when it's a full haystack, and then you chisel out the inside to asev lo menasi. The other brisa that said it's a good sukkah is when it started off with this cavity of 1/7, and then you chiseled out further. That cavity is the minimum size we've learned of an aisle, so the roof is called a functioning roof. It's not a problem of tasel menasui if you further chisel out the inside later. Ika Duramila Mirma, says the Gemara, there are those that this previous exchange they asked as a contradiction. Now we learned in the Mishnah Chayt Begadish. If you chisel out a haystack to make for the sukkah, einoi sukkah. I asked the Gemara about that sukkah. Stira in Brises, is chiseling out the haystack a good sukkah or not? Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, Loi kasha kam b'shishav chalal tefach b'meshach shiva kam b'shishav chalal tefach b'meshach shiva. That's the two cases they're going to be discussing, is whether it has this airspace. If it has this airspace to start, then there's no basis. It's not a problem to further dig it out, further chisel it out and create your sukkah, because the schach we're functioning as something, whereas if it does not have this airspace, then it would yes be a problem. This was a picture of the reeds, while this was a picture of the shafi and the gami. Says the Mishnah, a new discussion, which hopefully is reminiscent of the Gemara's in Eruvin, the Gemara's in Shabbos that we learned. And let's see. Says the Mishnah on the bottom of Tezayin Amud Aleph, Hamishal Shel Defanois Milmali Lo Lemat. If someone hangs walls from the top down, from your schach, you hang walls downward. Says the Mishnah, if it's 3 tefachim off the ground, meaning the walls descend but do not hit the ground and they stop with at least 3 tvachim there, then psula. But obviously the obvious implication is if it's within 3 to the floor, it's kosher. We'll explain when we look at the picture in a moment. If the walls are going upwards, then once it's 10 tvachim, it's automatically kosher. Comes along Rabbi Yossi, and Rashi says just like hanging walls on the bottom, once it's 10 tvachim is kosher, so to hanging walls on the top, once it's 10 tvachim it's kosher. In front of you, you see a picture that you have walls that do not reach all the way to the floor. It says the Gemara, it says the Mishnah, that if it's more than 3 tvachim off the floor, then it's a problem. Obviously, this is hinting to the rules of Lavud, the Lachum Sinai, that anytime we have gaps of 3 tvachim, we close them up. But if it's more than 3, it's going to be a problem. Says the Mishnah further, but if it's 10 tefachim tall, even if after that you have a lot of airspace, it's still going to be kosher. And Rav Yossi wanted to extend it, that if you have the 10 tefachim at the top, that as well is going to be kosher. Says the Gemara, what is the machlokes? What is this machlokes between the Tana and the Kama and between Rav Yossi, whether the 10 tefachim works only at the bottom or also at the top? You know what they're arguing about? They're arguing about a different discussion. Hanging mechitza. A mechitza does not reach all the way to the floor. What is the status of that mechitza in halacha? The fact that it does not reach the floor, does that invalidate it or not? Says the Gemara, and that's going to be the machlokes in the Mishnah, is going to be arguing about this very point. It's going to be arguing about what is the status of a mechitza taluya, a hanging chitza. Now we quote the source and also we learned over there. Bar, and this was Gemara in Eruvin, we were discussing bar she'i shebein shtei chatzeros. We have 2 chatzeros, me and my friend, and between us is a bar. Who can use that bar? Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara over there. Ein mimal menu b'Shabbos. You're never allowed to fill up in that pit on Shabbos. Ella im kein asa mechitza asara tfachim. Bein mel maila, bein mel mata, bein b'teich aignai. Opinion number 1, seemingly the opinion of Rav Yossi of our Mishnah, is that hanging down 10 tefachim wall, 10 tefachim is the din of a wall, and then it ascends and descends without any issue, and therefore even if it's much further from the top, it's going to be a kosher sukkah as well as going to be a kosher mechitza. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Aimer says Rav Shimon Gamliel, turning over to Tezayin Amud Beis, says Rav Shimon Gamliel, Beishamai Oimrim Milmaila, Ubeisil Oimrim Lemata. A machlokes Beishamai Ubeisil, whether it goes Milmaila from the top or Milmala from the Bottom. Says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda gets involved and he says, Loitei mechitza gedoyla min ha'kaisa shebeneim. You're making the mechitza, this partition that you're building inside the well between the two fields, you're making that greater than the wall itself. There's already a wall there, says Rav Yehuda. Why do you need another mechitza? That wall that runs across the two properties, that itself should be enough, which we'll see a picture in one more minute. But counters the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yechon, Rabbi Yehuda, but she does Rabbi Yosi, Amar Damar, Mechitza Tuluya Mater. It's really Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rabbi Rav Chana is not going according to everyone. He's only going within Rabbi Yosef and Mechitza Tluya, hanging Mechitza works. And that's the reason why the wall between the two fields, even though it doesn't reach the floor, because there's no floor, there's a well in between them, still it's going to be allowed to be carried. But the Gemara comments and says it's not true. Really, Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda, who had a separate machlekes that the Gemara was just introducing it, suggesting that's arguing about the same thing, says the Gemara of Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, never the twain shall meet. Each one is independently on its own. It does not need the other to exist. Lo Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbi Yosef, like Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbi Yehuda, so like Rabbi Yosi. And can look come Rabbi Yehuda also. When did Rabbi Yehuda say then over there that that the wall between the properties is enough and you do not need a mechitza? Elobei ruvichat seira is derabanan. Rabbi Yehuda said it's din by a din derabanan. By rabbinic decree, no, says Rabbi Yehuda, you have a wall between your properties. There's a well underneath, it has water, it doesn't have water, it has a wall, doesn't make a difference. The wall between your properties will be enough. Succah daraisa. Says Rabbi Yehuda, but you want to know by din daraisa? No way. I allow the hanging mechitza over there by rabbinic decree, a din derabanan. But in our Mishnah, on a din daraisa, nothing doing. Rabbi Yosef, like Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef says, I'll also argue. I can look Rabbi Yehuda, excuse me. I can't look on Rabbi Yosef elo b'Succah the mitzvahs asay. That's why it's gonna work. Al Shabbos this is skila loy. Not necessarily what we say the same thing. V'im taimar. Before we get to the v'im taimar, let's just catch up with some pictures. Here you have your well between the two properties, and says the Gemara of Yosi, if you put a mechitza between them, whether on the bottom, whether it's on the top, that is going to be enough. Here we say, or b'toich eigna within the lip. And on that, the Gemara countered and said, absolutely not. The wall running on top of the mechitza should be enough. Good aches will come down and make it a kosher wall. Says the Gemara, Vim Taimar, and if you're going to say, the story that happened in Sipari, who said over this story, we'll see the story in 1 minute, Lo Yalpi Rav Yosi, LLP, Rav Yishmo, Rav Yosi. So we're about to ask a story. We don't know the story, but we're going to see in a story that Rav Yosi seemingly disagrees with that which we just said. Says the Gemara, it's not a kasha, because that's Rav Yosi, that's Rav Yishmael per Rav Yosi. And our opinion is Rav Yosi by itself. And now the Gemara explains, what is the story they're referring to? Where we have a psak from Rabbi Yosi, you're in a Rishus Harabim and you forgot to bring the Sefer Torah to shul. How are you going to have Kriyas HaTorah? L'machar the next day, you do, says the Tanakama, Persus Adinim al Gabi Amudim, Ve'eviu Sefer Torah. Hang up sheets on the poles and bring the Sefer Torah. The Karabai and read it. It says the Gemara says seemingly is the Makar for Rav Yosi, they're going to be allowed to construct the walls. Says the Gemara, you really think we're discussing building walls in Shabbos? What do you mean? Where did you get the sadin in the sheets? It's Shabbos. You're in an area without an Erev. Where did you get the sheets from? Where do you bring the sadin in the sheets on Shabbos? The sheets were already there. Then they just use that sheet as a good mechitza of use and that's the raya that the sheets were hanging on their own, and we see they allowed them to carry based on those sheets. Before we continue, let's just see a beautiful picture of that which is going on over here. Says the Gemara, here you see two sheets hanging on pillars, here you see as well two sheets hanging, and therefore that's going to allow you to bring, as you see over here, the Bayeshei Sefer Torah all the way to the shul, whichever shul is necessary. Omar Rav Chisda, Omar Avimi, Machatzel Zarbo, Mashu, Mutaris B'Succah. A mat of 4 and a little bit works for a sukkah for what? Mishum Daifen, for a wall. Until now, the first 15 blot have really all been discussing the ceilings. A moment ago, we got into the walls, saying the walls are hanging, it's within 3, etc. Says Avimi, taking this the next step further, that if you want to create a wall, having a mat 4 tfachim and a little bit is kosher. Says the Gemara, what's the case? You hang the sheet in the middle, within 3 from the floor, and within 3 from the schach. Says the Gemara, and therefore anything that's within 3 has a din of lavid. Here you see you have your board that's 4 and a little bit, and you hang it within 3 of the schach, within 3 of the floor, and therefore what comes out is that you have lavid on the top and lavid on the bottom. The wall ki'ilu as if closes up the gap between the top and the bottom, and it's a kasha wall of your sukkah, says the Gemara. Says the Gemara, it's so gavaldik, but pshita. Of course, what's the chiddush? It's within lavid, a gavaldik. Of course, we know the din of lavid. Answers the Gemara, maybe you're not allowed to say 2 lavits, top and bottom. Kamash Malon, you can even say 2 lavits. Meisvei, is that true? Ask the Gemara, Machatzeles. Excuse me. Eisvei, says the Gemara, Machatzeles Shiva Mashu, we have a mat at 7, not 4. 7 and a little bit mutaris b'sukkah misham daif, and that's a kosher sukkah wall. Kitanya. So says the Gemara, 1 second, why is it a kosher wall? Seemingly it's 7 and a little bit, plus 3 of lavid, gives us within 10, and that's the din of a mechitza. But what do we see? We see seemingly we can only say lavid 1 time, not 2 times. Because we see that we required the mat to be 7 and a little bit, seemingly making that you only have 1 lavid, 1 3 to get it to 10. Answers the Gemara, no, Kitani that Bryce was talking, the sukkah gedayla, a large sukkah, by a large sukkah, we're not going to have a double lavid to permit it. My kamashlam, what's the chiddush? The Mishalos in the Fanas Mil Mahilamata, Kirav Yaisi, Omer Ravami, Pasar Bo, Mashu, Mater, Sukkah, a board, 4 and a little bit, Mater, Sukkah, Misham Daivin as a wall, Umukim Lei, Babachs, Mishalis Tvachim, Zamal Daivin, and again, put it within 3 Tvachim of the other wall, thereby having lavid close up the gap. Chabachs, Mishalis, Zamal Daivin, Galavid Dami. And once you're within 3, then you'll have love the other way. My kamash malon. What's the chiddush? Hakamash lon shir metzach sukkah kitana shiva. The chiddush is that the sukkah kitana, the minimum size, is 7 tfachim. Here we see some beautiful pictures, and we're going to call it a day of your mat. That's 7 and a little bit, says the Gemara. It's Moter Misham Daifen, and the Gemara answered that we're talking about a sukkah gedayla, large sukkah, and that's the reason we're not going to say 2 lavud. Zed the Gemara pas arba. This is the other way. As long as it's within 3 tvachim of the 3rd wall, that will be called close and create your sukkah. We'll